have of my dad is how every single time I used to hit a target score, he'd always promise to buy me something. And back in the days, a half-liter of Fanta orange was all that I needed for me to get the inspiration that I needed to move forward. I grew up in a place of domestic violence. My dad was very violent, but somehow, in some way, I was never worried about my dad's love for me. In as much as he was violent, in as much as he would beat my mom up, his love for me was steadfast. His love for me remained the same. On 30th of January 2018, I got a call that my dad was sick and in hospital. And for me that was weird because just a week earlier I had spoken to him on phone and he'd informed me that he was considering leaving employment to get into full-time business. And being the first time that a family member was sick to the point of hospitalization, it was a huge alarm. I couldn't rest that day. I kept calling and I eventually got to a place and I decided I couldn't keep calling. I had to go and personally see him because no matter how much anyone assured me that my dad was okay, I felt I needed to go and confirm it for myself that my dad was okay because he couldn't not be okay. It was not possible. So I traveled home that very day, straight to the hospital to see my dad, and he seemingly looked okay. There was nothing wrong about him, but the doctor said that they were running some tests and he was going to give us the results. So in the evening of that day, the results were out and the doctor informed us that due to his alcoholic problem, his liver was almost fully damaged. At that point, he told us it was at 50%, but I believe it was worse than that. And from that 29th of January, he was in hospital. And each and every single day, I would go see him. I went to see him on 30th and on 31st, and he was doing okay. Everything about him was okay. He looked weak, yes, but everything about him was okay. He had not lost his sense of humor. He had not lost who he was. He remembered each and every one of us, and he was still very conversant with the things that were happening around him. So there was nothing that would cause any alarm. On the 1st of February, it was a day like any other. We prepared porridge. I was on duty to go and see my dad in the morning. So we prepared the porridge and I went into the hospital to see him. The scene that found me at that point was one that I could not explain. Because we found my dad looking visibly disturbed. He was seated. He wasn't sleeping on his bed. He was seated on the bed. And he was clenching his fists. And he was saying that he was counting some money and he's dropped some money under the bed. And I couldn't understand because I kept looking and looking under the bed, but there was no money. He didn't even say hi to me, something that really alarmed me. And it was hard because I was alone at that point. My mom was off to work and my brother was back to Nairobi. So I was alone. I had gone to see my dad alone. So I didn't know what to do in that situation because he was seemingly not himself because there was no money in his hand, there was no money under the bed, there was no money anywhere. So the thoughts about money, I didn't know where it had come from. And so I talked to the ward mates who were with him and they said that he had been like that since the previous evening when he had last seen him. And then he kept saying that some money has been stolen from him, that he was counting money, some fell under the bed, some money has been stolen, he has some money in his hand. But all that did not make sense because it wasn't true. And then he had a drawer by his bedside at the hospital and he kept saying that I should open and get him the mark pens that he normally uses. My dad was a lecturer, so it was normal for him to have mark pens because that is what he used to teach. And I opened the drawer and there were no mark pens, but he kept insisting that he had carried the mark pens and they were supposed to be in that drawer, and there is nothing that I could do or say that would convince him. And when we left that morning, I knew things were moving from bad to us because previously my dad had not been that bad. He had not been that bad before. In the last 2 days of his hospitalization, everything had been okay. Apart from the sweating that the doctor had said was a withdrawal symptom because he hadn't had alcohol for a long time, everything else was okay. And when I left that afternoon, that morning, I remember just taking out my phone and reaching out to just 3 people. I remember just telling them that my heart is so broken. I can't stand watching my dad so helpless. He can't stand on his own. He can't use the washroom. He's in Pampers. He cannot feed himself. He's to be fed. And this was not the man I was used to. This was not the kind of person I had known my dad to be. He was someone totally different. And so when I left and sent in those messages, I had a couple of people just saying that we will pray with you, we'll stand with you. Because at that point, I personally couldn't pray. And for some reason, there was one of the people that I reached out to did not respond to my message. And I don't know why, but when I didn't get that response, for me it meant that he knew my father was going to die, but he just couldn't get himself to tell me. And I remember just uttering and telling God that if I go to the hospital in the afternoon and find my dad worse than he was in the morning, then I will know my dad is going to die. And I forgot about that conversation and went about just figuring out what my dad was going to have for lunch, what the kind of information I was going to pass to my brother and my mom about his condition. And when it got to lunchtime, I again went to see my dad. Previously in the morning, he had been seated on his bed. But now when he went in the afternoon, he couldn't lift his head. And I didn't remember the conversation I had with God in the morning about if I find him worse, then I would know my father is going to die. I didn't remember that. But when I was feeding him that afternoon, he had to be held by two people so that he could be able to sit upright, so that he could feed. And again, that was even more heartbreaking than what was there in the morning, because at least in the morning he could sit by himself, I could be able to feed him nicely. But this time, he was worse. And the doctor wasn't around. We got the nurse and we asked the nurse, why is it that my dad is talking about things that don't make sense? And the nurse said, it's again a withdrawal symptom because he hasn't had alcohol for the past 3 days. And my heart rested with that. And then just before the end of the visiting hours, he asked for my mom. She hadn't arrived, so I just called her and I told her dad wants to see you. And she came in again. We didn't talk much. She just led us in prayer. And then everybody else left and it was just me, my mom and myself. And my dad in that place. And he was sweating and all I was doing was just wiping off the sweat from his face. And he kept again saying that he's going on a journey and he didn't want us to leave him. He was very clinging. He didn't want us to leave him. He just wanted us to be there. And he kept saying, no, you're not going to leave me. I'm going on a journey. And my mom had to tell him, by the way, we'll just be waiting outside at the car park. When you are done with your bath and everything else, then we are going to go on the journey with you. And then the money that he had previously refused to give in the morning, he told me that you can take some of this money and remain some for me. That would be it. And so we just left for the afternoon because the visiting hours were over. And at around about 4:15 that same day, we had a call from the hospital. They called my mom and asked, is this the next of kin to this person? And she said yes. And the receptionist or whoever called said that the doctor wants to see you. And we weren't very far from the hospital, so we got in with my mom. And the doctor said that 1 hour ago, your father stopped breathing normally and we had to use oxygen on him. And after we used oxygen on him, he was able to recover and start breathing normally, but we do not want to take the risk again. So what we're advising is, because we don't know if this is going to recur, we'd like you to transfer him to a hospital with an ICU because we don't have the facility, so that just in case he's not able to breathe again normally, then he can be able to be well taken care of in a hospital that has an ICU. And the doctor gave us the list of options. And he said that this case is very urgent, so you guys go consult and find out which hospital you want to take him to. I'll do a referral for you. Yeah, and we'll immediately just transfer him to a hospital with an ICU. So again, we're just my mom and I, and we walked out of the hospital. His sister is a nurse, so we walked out, had a conversation with her, and we opted to take him to Kenyatta National Hospital. So the doctor had advised that when you come back, we just look for where he is so that he would do a referral for us. And so we went our separate ways. When we came back now after the consultation, when we came back, when we first went to see my dad and then to look for the doctor, he was again on oxygen. So we went separate directions. My mom went to one side and I went to the other side to look for the doctor. So when I came back, my mom was already back and she was with the doctor, but I noticed something strange. Ideally, when the oxygen is flowing through the body, you can tell, but the oxygen that my dad was on wasn't flowing through. It was as if he was like the oxygen wasn't getting through. And then the doctor at that point, I don't know if my mom noticed, but the doctor was looking for a pulse. He had his, I don't know what the machine is called, but on my dad's heart. And I noticed the doctor is looking for a pulse. And I didn't say anything. I just observed, and in my heart I knew that my dad was going to die at that point. And I remember just the doctor asked us to leave to go to the reception, and when I went to the reception, I was only continuously just saying one thing: God, just bring him back so that he can get saved. I wasn't even saying just heal him. I wasn't even saying that. The only thing I said, that God bring him back so that he can get saved, because it was very clear for me that my dad was going to die at that point. And after a few minutes, we had a friend to my aunt who came in, and we showed her where my dad was. And then after a few minutes, the doctor called us into an office. It looked like more of a lab because we had a lot of test tubes and a lot of beakers and a lot of things. So he called us, and my mom was leading. She was ahead of me and the doctor was behind, and I didn't even close the door. He just said, "Huyo mzee ametuacha."